Hello, friends, and welcome to another day of getting into the Word so that the Word gets into us. And just a heads up, if you haven't already read through the assigned scriptures for today, just get ready. It's going to be difficult. It's going to seem like there's redundancy in the repetition of the instruction. It's interesting because we think about the law, we think mostly in the ceremonial sense and mostly dealing with the relationship between God and man, and how the offerings were presented in order to bridge the gap, in order to demonstrate love and appreciation, a sign of worship. But also in the law, we see a practical component, that is hygiene. We're getting into the section of Leviticus where we're talking about skin disease. We're talking about being unclean in relation to things that might be touched. We now, through science and technology, know that much of what was being advocated here by God to the people, there's scientific knowledge now that it was ultra hygienic. I mean, it was very hygienic in the sense of trying to prevent the spread of diseases, especially skin diseases like leprosy. Taking careful steps to isolate those who may have contracted leprosy so that it would not spread throughout the whole camp. Because let's not forget, we got 2 million plus people here. And so there's got to be great care taken, because once the disease would get started, it could easily go through and ravage the whole entire nation. And so I just want to focus on 2 verses in chapter 13, and that's verses 45 and 46. So it says, "The person who has a case of serious skin disease is to have his clothes torn, his hair hanging loose, and he must cover his mouth and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' He will remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He must live alone in a place outside the camp." And so here we see an extensive, in other situations you have an examination that takes place, you have isolation and careful care, a re-examination, but in this case we're told that the person with a serious skin disease is to demonstrate that through his appearance, by the tearing of his clothes, by the letting down of his hair, or it says hanging loose of his hair, and by him crying out, "Unclean, unclean." And that was still taking place in Jesus' day, because we see that example of those who had the leprosy, crying unclean, letting everybody know that, hey, don't get anywhere near me, because you might contract the same skin disease. And it goes on in verse 46 to say they got to be placed outside the camp. They got to isolate. What this goes to show? This goes to show that God, in his care for his people, wasn't just focused on how they were going to relate to him. He was also focused on how they were going to maintain a healthy environment among themselves. And that's going to go into other areas as we continue reading through Leviticus and some aspects of Numbers, in that God gives instruction to regulate how they interact with one another, and of course ultimately to preserve a very hygienic culture or hygienic situation to prevent disease. Now, like I said, it's going to be difficult, but it's worth your read. It's worth noticing how detailed God is in giving this instruction. Although there's a redundancy to it to us, there's intentionality on God's behalf. And of course, the priests are going to take lead in this. So don't get discouraged today. Stay committed, stay focused to it. Don't get discouraged tomorrow, because it's going to be some of the same thing going on there as well. But it's the Word of God. And we want to take note of what it might tell to us. In this case, noting that God is very careful in trying to protect and preserve the health of his people. In this case, in providing very detailed and practical instruction on how to deal with diseases. Well, I love you, friends. I pray you have a great day today, that you are faithful in doing what God has called us to do. And of course, we can always summarize that with that one statement: live sent.